love to see it. Let's talk a little bit about the film. We won't do any spoilers for those who haven't seen it.
Well, in terms of spoilers, how many people here have not seen the movie? Love that.
Subscribers?
That is so great.
Amazing. Well, let's just talk about like the inception of this film in the first place. So, I believe you've been reading about it and hearing you talk about it as well. There was like some change through the time of like a beginning and the story, and then to what actually got filmed.
Every movie has its own narrative. I was 18 walking through the public gardens in Boston where I passed by this statue and paid no attention. It was a man on a horse, and like all sort of, patriotic gore, I just walked past it. And I had loved reading about the Civil War when I was a kid. I'd even gone to battlefields, but I paid no attention. And it wasn't until maybe, 20 years later, maybe more, 15, that I came upon a monograph that someone had sent me by Lincoln Kirsten, who was the dramaturg of the Balanchine Ballet and a relative of Robert Gould Shaw, one of the characters in the movie. And I was just knocked out, and there was a script that I thought had real potential, but also needed some work. And I began to work on it for a studio that I had made another movie for. And what I wanted to talk about today, because it's a different movie, movies are different depending on when they're made and depending on when they're seen. Because there's film in history, and then there's history in film. And I think they're affected by the times when you make them, but I think they then affect the times in different ways as well. In this case, the movie, as it was first given to me, it tilted toward being what I'd have to call a white savior narrative. It was the story of Robert Gould Shaw, all true. Parents were abolitionists, and he was charged with forming this regiment to fight and to bring together an African-American regiment. And he did, and they fought, and this is their story. It was very important to me that we not bowdlerize the story and make up events, because this was an opportunity to redress history. Because at that time that we made this movie, I don't think the fact of black participation in the Civil War was at all known. It had been a very popular story in Boston when it happened in the late 1800s. But Boston had gone through some very serious times. There were very serious busing riots, all sorts of racial issues in Boston, and the story had been lost to history. There had even been a school named after one of the members of the 54th Massachusetts who survived the attack. But that was long over. And as I looked at this script, and as I began to work on it and began to read about the history, I realized that it was tilting in the wrong direction. And never more was I made to believe that until I began working with Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman and Andre Braugher and Jimmy Kennedy. Because you had to be an idiot not to see that they were possessed of the beating heart of this movie. Not that Matthew Broderick wasn't, because his work is wonderful in the movie and central. But the movie is about what happens and why these men are there. And it was further illustrated to me when I started to produce the movie and put it together, when men started showing up from all over America. Teachers, military men, doctors, lawyers. They had known this story somehow, and they felt that it was their obligation to participate and to represent. And they came, many of them, and lived in horrible conditions, in the tents, in eating bad food, because they wanted to be a part of this. And without them, we couldn't have made this movie. Many of them were reenactors. You probably know who those are, these guys who go out there wearing the uniforms and do this. It's a fine madness, but they are living historians. And without them, I don't think we could have made it either. But I just thought you should know those things about this movie. I don't want to, talk about the plot, certainly for those who haven't seen it. But I think that's something you could know.
Yeah, for sure. That's amazing. I'm sure there are a lot of conversations, the studio, the actors, everyone just putting this together.
Well, imagine, this is, what year was this, 1989? Something like that, I think so. And, and I had, at that time, a youngish, 30-ish-year-old director, white kid, trying to tell these men about their history and the potential for that to be problematic. But their generosity and their humor about that is what made it all work. And many years later, I realized when I was making a movie about my own relatives in the forest of Belarus, that if I had been asked to find that voice of my ancestors, it would have been easy for me too, because it was in my head just as this voice was in their head too. And that's how we found it together.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I would love to talk about the cast as well. How was the casting process? And working with these amazing actors?
Well, it seems amazing now. At the time, these guys were known to some of us. Denzel had done Cry Freedom, so I'd seen him with Stephen Biko, and I'd seen him on a television show that he'd done called St. Elsewhere. But it was a known secret. It wasn't like I had picked him out of a crowd, but I saw that potential, and I wanted him to do that movie. And the studio said, well, yeah, okay, but we don't want to meet his price. And the way we got him is that Freddie Fields, who was our producer, gave up some of his money in order to get Denzel in the movie. Morgan, I'd seen do something at BAM called The Gospel of Colonus, and he'd done a small movie called Street Smart, I think, which is a very good movie. And he played a terrifying pimp, if you remember that movie. And he walked in my office and he had that smile and that way about him. And he just looked at me and these are his words, and I actually talk about it in the book. He looked at me and says, "You got me." And that's who he was through the entire movie, as a kind of ally to me. And he, by the way, had soon after, I think, with some of the money he made from this movie, he bought the plantation on which his family had been slaves in Tennessee. Andre Braugher was in the senior show at Juilliard, the graduating showcase, and he'd never been on a set before. I saw him on stage and literally cast him the next day. The first day on the set, we said, Andre, just, you go over there and you'll hit your mark, and there was this pause, and he said, well, what's a mark? And by that night, he was going toe-to-toe with Morgan Freeman, and just absolutely holding his own. He was, miraculous. Jimmy Kennedy had been doing pretty uninspired day player work in cop shows, and yet he possessed something very important to the movie. He possessed this a deep spirituality. He was a very religious man. He actually took me to a lot of those congregations in Georgia, and that spirit infuses the movie too, as you will see. And one last, which is obviously, Matthew's work was already known. He had become quite a star because of Ferris Bueller, but a different kind of star for a different generation. But Cary Elwes had starred already in The Princess Bride. And I didn't think there was a shot in hell that he would do this movie as a supporting part. But he knew what we were after too, and he cut his fee and played supporting to Matthew in this movie.
Amazing. Something else that you mentioned was just your age when you were taking this movie on. Your age.
My age? Yes, do we have to talk about that?
No. when you were taking this on, and I noticed in kind of your filmography, you've done so many, a lot of work in TV, and then TV movies. This was like the second theatrical movie you were taking on?
Yeah, there was some real skepticism that somebody who had done this sort of whiny talk fest on television called 30-something could possibly do this movie. And in retrospect, I think they might have been right. But I was too young to even know what I didn't know. And I also went back and I watched Ron by Kurosawa about 600 times because he didn't have a lot of money either. And there was so much that I could learn from that movie. Not to mention that Lawrence of Arabia had come out in 70 millimeter when we started to make this movie. It was re-released, and I and the cast and the whole crew, we were in Atlanta, Georgia, went to go see that movie together before we started shooting. And that was very inspirational. In fact, this is the only movie I've ever made that's in 70.
Yes,
It's because of that, having seen that, we just insisted, and they didn't want to do it, and we just pounded on them, and they finally said, oh, okay, fine.
and here we are, watching today. Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about your book, your memoir.
Well, yeah, I had no idea I was going to write a book until COVID hit, and I was sort of becalmed, and I don't do well in that circumstance. And I did what I've never done, which I started looking at some of my movies. I just am not that person. And when I looked at them, I realized that maybe taken together they had some meaning. They had some meaning about then, but I think they have some meaning now. I think they have some meaning in the context of what movies have become or what they are no longer, and what they are no longer in the culture, and what they are no longer maybe in their intentions and purposes and the seriousness of them. And so that led me into what I didn't know was a book. I know we all have computers, and you know, on your computer you have files, and you just name them, sometimes arbitrarily. And I remember on this one I named it B-K, because I didn't want to admit that it was actually a book. I didn't want to put that pressure on myself. So for a long time I didn't, and then gradually it just sort of became one.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay, and there's been such great reviews. You're now on the best time.
Yeah, it's surprising the hell out of me, but I'm not going to fight it. I'm very pleased by it, obviously.
How has the reaction been? What have people been saying?
You know, my movies have always been very polarizing. They've been both really reviewed favorably, and they've been panned, often the same movie simultaneously. This book seems more unanimous, which surprises the hell out of me. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ed.
This is my pleasure. I really thank you all. I had seen this only once before, oh, actually twice. I saw it once when we premiered it in 70, and we did it a few years ago, but I don't think many people have even seen this print, and so we're all lucky to see it again, so enjoy it. Thank you.